Viridian, The Green Guide, by Clouds, My Head in the Clouds Not Coming Down, led by Oakshadow 5. Chapter 32, Electricity. Summary. Izuku analyzes Kaminari's quirk. Izuku couldn't stop thinking about Kaminari's quirk. There was a familiar feeling of nostalgia that reminded him of when Kachan's quirk had first manifested, before they found out that Izuku was quirkless. He'd thrown himself headfirst into figuring out Kachan's explosions and imagining how they'd be useful for hero work. It made this whole thing with Kaminari bittersweet, because Izuku wanted to be overwhelmingly, deliriously happy that he was analyzing a friend's quirk, but he couldn't shake the dull feeling of dread that bubbled up in his stomach every time he thought of it, like he was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And to make the whole thing worse, he felt guilty that he hadn't been able to keep this dynamic with Kachan, because it was his fault that they'd grown apart. If Izuku hadn't been born quirkless, then maybe they would still be friends and Izuku would still be analyzing Kachan's quirk to help him get into UA. He pushed those feelings down again, determined to ignore them. Eraser had said it was okay to be sad, but Izuku didn't want to waste whatever time he had left feeling sorry for himself. Instead, he went back to thinking about Kaminari's limit. They texted a few times since they officially became friends a few weeks ago, and from those conversations, Izuku got the idea that Kaminari tended to think it was better to go over his limit right at the beginning of a fight in an attempt to end things early. His line of thinking was that his brain was going to fray itself eventually, so he may as well take out his opponent before that happened. Izuku didn't necessarily agree. Sure, every hero had special moves that almost always ended a fight, but the keyword there was almost always. There would always be villains who had quirks able to counter him, and there would always be factors like civilians and hostages that prevented him from going all out. According to all the fights Izuku had watched and been in, Kaminari's best bet wasn't to end the fight quickly, but to figure out how to fight in an endurance match. But how was he supposed to do that when he couldn't direct his own electricity? There didn't seem to be much point to him trying to shoot lightning at an opponent, because Kaminari had said the electricity would just go everywhere and hurt anyone around. But it was also a good thing the electricity went everywhere, because his limit would be more than enough to kill someone if it were more concentrated, like, say, if he were in direct contact with them. Izuku's eyes widened, and he immediately shot a text to Kaminari to meet him at the park after school, then got out the notebook he dedicated to Kaminari's quirk and started making a plan. Denki was confused. He'd been at lunch when Midoriya had texted him wanting to meet ASAP, but then there hadn't been any follow-up texts. The text itself wouldn't have been that strange on its own, but it was strange coming from Midoriya. In the few short weeks since they'd started hanging out, Denki had slowly realized that Midoriya never asked for anything. He let Denki be in charge of when and how often they hung out, almost like he was afraid that he'd stop talking to him if he ever pushed for what he actually wanted. So an urgent text like this was completely out of character, and more than a little worrying. What if something was wrong? What if Midoriya was in trouble? What if he needed Denki to help him to get out of an abusive situation or something? Was he even smart enough to help him? What if he wasn't? Oh no, what if that was why this meeting was urgent? What if Midoriya had gotten tired of how stupid he was and decided that he didn't want to be friends with him anymore? Denki didn't know if he would be able to handle that. Despite what his mom said about him being a social butterfly, he didn't really have that many close friends. Sure, he could make friends pretty easily, but most of his classmates didn't have the patience to deal with his dumb jokes and short attention span, or they thought he was too clingy, so they never really got past the casual acquaintance stage, like Midoriya had. Denki didn't want to think about what he would do if Midoriya said he didn't want to be friends anymore. A part of him knew that he was being silly. Midoriya had asked to be his friend, and he'd admitted that he didn't have any other friends, so he probably wasn't going to voluntarily end things just because Denki was annoying. As much as he told himself that, however, it didn't stop his brain from trying to convince him that Midoriya absolutely hated him, and he was such a terrible human being that having 0 friends was preferable to being friends with him. He didn't even go home to change out of his uniform before running to the park, only to find that Midoriya was already waiting for him in casual clothes. How did he already have time to change out of his school uniform? Wait, did Midoriya even go to school? He was really smart, so he had to go, but he had never mentioned which middle school he went to. Denki shook his head. He could worry about that later. For now, he needed to figure out what was wrong with his friend. Midoriya was practically vibrating with energy. Even as he waited, he couldn't stop moving and he was either bouncing in place or pacing back and forth. Denki's first thought was that he must be nervous, but that didn't seem right, because, despite his constant movement, Midoriya didn't seem distressed. In fact, he seemed almost excited about something. As soon as he caught sight of Denki, Midoriya ran toward him with a huge smile on his face. A human taser! Denki took a small step back, a little overwhelmed by Midoriya's enthusiasm, which was saying something considering his own quirk and personality. But if Midoriya was smiling, then he probably still wanted to be friends, which was one worry crossed off the list. But Denki was still a little lost about what his friend had just said. What? A human taser! Midoriya took a notebook out of his backpack and started flipping through the pages. We've been thinking about your quirk all wrong. You've been thinking about it like a Tesla coil or even a lightning generator, but that's not it. You can't shoot lightning like Electroplant, because your quirk isn't like that. You're a human taser! Denki blinked a few times to give his mind a second to catch up, only to realize he was still lost. Midoriya, buddy, you are making absolutely zero sense. Now that he thought about it, Midoriya was probably one of those people who had problems communicating when they got excited. Their brains moved so fast that the mouse couldn't keep up, and they had no idea how to say what weighs in their minds without it getting jumbled around. Knowing that didn't make him magically understand what Midoriya was trying to say, however. In fact, it just made him feel more stupid. If Midoriya was explaining this to someone of average intelligence, they probably would have gotten it by now. Midoriya was still vibrating with energy as he attempted to explain. You can't shoot lightning. He said it like the conclusion should be obvious, and maybe to him it was, but Denki still had no idea what he was trying to say. Of course he couldn't shoot his lightning. That had been one of the first things he told Midoriya about his quirk. You already knew that, dude, Denki reminded him. It's not new information. No, it's just... Midoriya seemed to be getting frustrated by this point, but Denki didn't know if it was from his own trouble communicating his thoughts or Denki's complete inability to understand them. Denki's stomach sank as he realized it was probably the latter. Suddenly, Midoriya's eyes brightened like he just had an idea. Attack me! If there was a human equivalent of a blue screen, Denki was it. What? Midoriya looked even more excited, if that was possible. Attack me! But Denki was so confused. I'll hurt you. That's the point. I'll be fine, Midoriya said dismissively, like he hadn't casually just told Denki to injure him. Now, come and attack me! Denki shrugged and charged up for his finishing move. At least the command was easy to understand. It's your funeral. No, not like that. Midoriya held up his hands for him to stop. Hit me! Denki looked down at his hands before deactivating his quirk. Okay. He obediently threw a weak punch, but Midoriya redirected it immediately. He was a small guy, so Denki had just kinda assumed he didn't know how to fight, but the way Midoriya reacted to his attack made it seem like he was almost bored, like he'd fought guys twice his size for fun. Oh, and Denki was still confused. What was the point of asking him to punch him if he wasn't even going to land a hit? Midoriya, however, was grinning, a manic look in his eyes. Perfect! Now, hit me again, but this time, electrify your arm slightly. You should only need a few hundred volts to do what I'm thinking, so don't try to go over your limit just yet, okay? Denki did what he was told and charged his arm with barely any electricity, or at least it felt like barely any in comparison to his finishing move, and threw a second punch at Midoriya. Considering that this punch wasn't any stronger than the last one had been, Denki was fully expecting an identical result. This time, however, when Midoriya tried to block the punch, his body seized up and Denki was able to push past his arm and punch him in the face, which immediately launched Midoriya to the ground. Oh no, what did I do? Denki knelt to help Midoriya up, stopping at the last minute with his hands hovering uselessly over his friend's body as he remembered that his body was still charged with electricity. Dude, are you okay? Please say you're okay. Midoriya groaned and sat up with a dorky smile on his face. See, Kaminari, you've only been thinking of your quirk in terms of long-distance combat, so you've been blind to its real possibilities. You'll be able to do the most damage in close range when you can touch your opponent. You're a human taser! Denki stared at his hand, sparks arcing between his fingers. Holy shit. You've been focusing on raising your limit so you don't fry your brain, Midoriya said. But if you can touch your opponent, you won't even need your whole limit, because even a tiny bit of electricity will go a long way. The person themselves should act as a lightning rod of sorts and attract all your electricity to them, which means you won't be wasting as much electricity uselessly electrifying the air around you. Denki's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. So, what now? Midoriya grinned and jumped to his feet. Now, I'm going to teach you how to fight. That was chapter 32 of Viridian the Green Guide. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you all next time. Bye! Hey, outtakes. If there was a human equivalent of a blue screen. sorry. No. Oh my gosh. Just blue screen.